Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figure of Lando Calrissian from Star Wars Battlefront II. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. This past week we did a rewatch of Solo, a Star Wars story. I really like this film, it's a lot of fun. We saw it several times in the theatre during its original theatrical release, and we tried to collect up as many of the action figures from the film as we could source here in New Zealand. That was, unfortunately, during the 5-point of articulation era, which is not my favourite. I'm really excited to see Hasbro going through and releasing some characters from the Solo film in the newer and higher articulated vintage collection line, which is really exciting. We can see that we have Lando Calrissian here on a Battlefront II card. Now he does wear this outfit at the end of Solo, a Star Wars story, but because you get to run around in this particular outfit in the video game Battlefront 2, it is a lot more prominent, so I do understand why they have put it on a Gaming Greats card rather than Solo, a Star Wars story, but nevertheless I'm going to be adding this one to my Solo action figure display and I can't wait. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take a closer look at the figure and all of the fantastic details. But first, let's take one last look at the backing card. As the name implies, the packaging for the Vintage Collection line of 3.75-inch action figures is heavily inspired by the original backing cards from the Kenner series of vintage Star Wars action figures from the 70s and 80s, which is really fun. We've got the Star Wars logo here at the top and a single chrome racetrack design surrounding the character art here on the right side. This is a Battlefront II action figure, so we have the Battlefront II logo here in a red font, and for this particular version of Lando, we have this vibrant blue color for the title plate, which reads Lando Calrissian, Star Wars Battlefront II, and that same color in behind the figure. It's a really nice contrast to the yellow, red, and white of his costume there. This is fantastic character art. The likeness here of Donald Glover, of course, who portrayed Lando in Solo, a Star Wars story, is just fantastic there, and I really like the angle and the pose. We've got the blaster pointing up there, we've got a bit of a cape swoosh there, we can see the costume details really well, and we've even got some explosions going on there in the background. Absolutely fantastic. I really like it when the character art here on the side really matches what we see here. Just looks really fun. We've even got sort of the cape swooshing out here by the arms. It just sort of really lines and matches up. And it's just because it's art, we've got a really nice lighting going on here. Some promotional images are a little bit dark or perhaps in shadow. Sometimes they look like a screen grab from an episode, so they don't look quite as optimal as created art for the backing card. This is definitely one that is a contender for keeping them carded, but I really want to add this particular figure to my Solo collection, so I'm going to be opening it up very soon. Moving on to the back, this one is a little bit different to some of the other Vintage Collection backing cards. So we can see that we have the Gaming Greats logo here, and instead of the usual grid of 8 figures that we can also find, we only have 2 here, and they are both Gaming Greats figures. We have this Lando figure from Star Wars Battlefront II and Shay Vizsla, who is of course from Star Wars The Old Republic. And of course we've got this extra space here because we've only got 2 figures pictured. We have a blurb repeated in a few different languages. Celebrate iconic moments from a galaxy far, far away with figures inspired by the Star Wars video games. We have got a new backing card style for the very, very most recent Vintage Collection backing cards, so I'm curious to see what Gaming Greats figures will look like on the back when those new figures come out. We can see this one slightly older at VC238, and the rest of the backing card there is just barcode and all of that kind of copyright, warning text, all of that kind of stuff. I do kind of wish they found a way to kind of condense this down. It does take up a lot of real estate on the back of the card, but generally speaking, I like the front best, and this is how I'm going to be looking at my figures if I do keep them carded. I do keep my backing cards of all my Vintage Collection figures that I do open, so this one's going to get stored away, but now let's open it up. So now I have the Lando figure and his blaster accessory out of the packaging. We can go over all of the details, and of course the first thing that you can really see once you get them out of the packaging is this fantastic soft goods cape. It's a little bit hard to tell that this is soft goods when it's in in the packaging. One of the original Solo 5-point of articulation figures of Lando had a plastic cape, and to be honest, just sort of looking at this one from a distance, I thought this one was plastic as well, because you can see it really sort of holds its shape. But when it's out of the packaging, you can really see that this is a thick polyester fabric. It's almost not quite spongy, but it's definitely a thicker fabric compared to many other fabrics that I have seen from the vintage collection line, and even in the Black Series 6-inch line as well. And I believe that is because we want it to hold its shape, sort of get this really fun cape effect, but also the interior blue isn't sort of a sewn section, it is printed. And because white fabric tends to be just a little bit more prone to being see-through than other colors, we don't want that large blue color coming through here to the back. So we need it to be a little bit thicker so that we still get a nice white color here on the back, but that vibrant blue here. And so when you look at it really close up, you can see that that texture is printed there. It goes all the way up to the cut edge there, and then we have this sort of white border across the bottom here, which is accurate to the way that we see it on that backing card art. You can even kind of see the thickness of the fabric in the cross section here, especially around that shoulder section. You can see just how thick this fabric is, and it just looks fantastic. You don't even need to worry about it just kind of disappearing behind the figure when you put it on display. It holds the shape that we saw when it was in the backing card. The plastic tray kind of had the cape a little bit tighter in, but it barely moves when we get it out of the packaging, and that's just fantastic. So I am not going to remove this cape. You can see the way that they have attached it is with a small white cord around the neck that is secured through a tiny hole in the sort of the collar section of the cape, and it is secured with a very small knot. So once you kind of undo a knot that's been cut short like this, it's very, very hard to tie a knot at the very, very end of a cord, and I really don't want to potentially rip through or make that hole bigger, or even rip through to the edge there. So I'm going to be very careful with this cape. I don't want to damage the attachment here. Just the way that they sort of managed to do these cord attachments in the factory is always going to be neater than I can do at home. And also, this is a white cape. I don't want to get it dirty. You know, I've got clean hands. I always try to when I'm opening up my figures, but still, you know, just it's like handling paper. We humans have oils on our skin, and I don't want to sort of damage this whiteness. I do get a little bit worried about white capes like this, insects and just discoloring over time. Sometimes you just get these little phantom marks, discoloration, yellow sort of staining and things like that. So I'm going to really try and keep this well and protected. It is on the back of the figure, so if you do get marks on the back there, it won't be as visible, but they can be very hard to wash. There was a particular Snow Bunny Padme Amidala Ilum figure from the Micro series that had a white fabric cape. It is very hard to keep that one clean because it's just white, and it's just, you know, one of those things. Even just standard action figures, just the plastic finds a way of just, you know, becoming discolored over time. But of course, they have to stick with the color that's used on the original costume, and it does look really cool, especially with those white sort of flared pants that Lando is wearing in this outfit as well. I think it's fantastic. It doesn't have any kind of seams in terms of stitching here. The collar is just kind of a high point here. There isn't a stitched line there to kind of give the collar a shape, but the way that this cord pulls it around the neck gives it a pretty cool collar shape there as well. So it is simple to replicate if you sort of want to customize, but because of that cord attachment, I believe it is not really intended to be removable. Something that I guess you could remove is this red scarf. It is separate, which I wasn't expecting. I thought perhaps it would be sort of attached there, but I can sort of swing this around. I can sort of push and pull, so it feels like it's not actually glued or permanently attached around at the collar underneath the cape. It feels like it is simply inserted and sort of sitting around him like a scarf would be. Now this is made out of plastic. It holds its shape nicely. It sort of sits on the chest and it flows down in a straight line. You can sort of see it there from the side on, and we even have some white printing detail stripes there down the front. Absolutely fantastic. Lando is known for his fashion sense, his capes, and I really like the fact that that's kind of followed through on the design of this toy. Very fashionable fashionable with some really cool, vibrant colors. So another little element that I just wanted to touch on before I go over all of the painting and articulation details is, of course, this really vibrant kind of almost Hawaiian style yellow shirt that Lando is wearing. So we kind of have that classic original trilogy kind of shirt opening style that we see that Luke and Han wear, where we don't have sort of buttons down the center, which is very sort of earthly to normal. We have this kind of closure that's hidden on the side, and then we have this sort of opening sort of rectangle where the collar's kind of fallen open. We see Han wear this style of shirt a lot, and I think that that's really fun. Of course, Solo, A Star Wars Story, was made many years after the original trilogy, but of course we see those sort of connecting points matching it up to the original trilogy era. This is a really fun, vibrant yellow. It's sort of really giving me like cruise wear, holiday wear, very tropical vibes, especially with the sort of vibrant blue and the white. It's really fun and really eye-catching. So they have done a really good job of replicating the print that appears on the shirt. If I quickly grab the backing card here, we can see that there is this really cool sort of print. It's kind of like a little sort of a stingray shaped flying vehicle flying over sort of blue water with kind of a red sort of sun there in the sky. So now that we can sort of see the print detail on the shirt, we can take a closer look and see it's really small. Hasbro has done a really good job of replicating it here. I can see the blue water, I can see the white sort of two-winged vehicle and the red sun there. So we can see that this is repeated in 1, 2, 3, 4 stripes down, that pattern sort of repeating there. When we look at the sides, we can see that it's not really repeating down here at the side. This is probably the modern digital printing. It's probably a lot easier to do it on a front flat surface. And then when we look at the sleeves, we can see a one sort of column down here in the front, but turning it around, there is no more printing on the sleeves. We just have that one stripe down the front, which is fine. Generally speaking, the cape does cover a lot of the sleeves, but we might find that it starts to look a little bit more obvious when we start getting into the articulation and posing with a blaster, where we have to start twisting the arms and things like that. Now, moving on to the back, being very careful to lift the cape up so I'm not going to damage that cord, we can see that there is printing on the back, but only in one color. We just have the white element details of that sort of flying vehicle there. We don't have the blue element of the water underneath the vehicle, nor do we have that red sort of sun or red moon there off in the distance. So a little bit of printing there on the back, and also you can see the back of the sleeves have no printing either. To be honest, I don't mind. I can only imagine the printing process it must have taken to replicate that fine pattern there on the front of the shirt. And because of the cape, we're really never almost going to see it unless I'm going to customize this figure or for whatever reason take the cape off, which to me would be a shame. I mean, Lando is iconic for his capes. We see his collection of capes in the movie, so I think it would be a shame to remove the cape from this particular figure. He does have it in the backing card out there as well, so I totally understand why Hasbro perhaps went with the slightly less complicated, and I know slightly cheaper route of not having to do the complicated printing on the back of the figure. But for me personally, it doesn't really sort of downgrade this figure in my eyes. I totally understand the complexity of that printing detail there. I mean, back in the vintage era, getting something like this would have just been absolutely near impossible just with the fine level of printing. And then of course we've got this fun red scarf, which even has sort of a sculpted sort of hanging point there to the end and those stripes. Overall, the colors, the details of this figure are just fantastic. So because we've got that white cape, I am going to be careful with the articulation, but I'm very, very keen to see what kind of poses I can get him into. I'm going to start off with just going a little bit over the paint and sort of job of the details before I get into the articulation. And of course, I'm going to start with the head. So I thought Donald Glover did a fantastic job of playing a younger Lando in the film. And I know we had an announcement of a further series or film starring Donald Glover, you know, some more stories with Lando. We are still waiting on that. I know he is a very talented and very busy individual. I'm really hoping that we will still see that sometime in the future, because I thought his portrayal in the film was just fantastic. And Lando is such a fun, charismatic character. And the likeness here is just fantastic. We've got that iconic facial hair, the eyebrows, the sideburns. Just really cool. The hair is sculpted as part of the head. It is not a separate piece attached. And we do have one tiny paint floor. We've got just a tiny bit of the hair sculpting piece here that has just missed just a tiny dot of paint there. But overall, really nice. I especially like this modern sort of paintwork style that we get for human faces. Just the eyes especially. You don't get that sort of wide-eyed googly effect on modern figures, but we still get that hint of white and pupils. It's just absolutely, it's so tiny and it always impresses me. It really just sort of adds to the overall sort of accuracy and likeness of the sculpting here. Really nicely done. And as I mentioned before, we've got that iconic sort of original trilogy sort of opening there for the shirt, and we can see that this shirt actually has cuffs. We can see this sort of folded back here. We can see that sculpting here on the back of the sleeve. Really nice. And then of course we've got these iconic sort of 70s era slightly flared white pants, which I think is so fun with the color palette of the rest of the outfit. We've got a white belt running across the top of the pants, and then we have this separate black belt which attaches to his very unique holster. So I'm just going to quickly lift his arm out of the way. So Lando has a very interesting holster. It's not like a big sort of leather holster like we see on Han Solo and stuff. It's these kind of funny little black sort of clips. They kind of go around, and you can kind of see I can just sort of open this one up. So they're just kind of, this one is a sort of a sealed loop. You can see there. This one's not going to open. That one's fully attached, but this one I can lift up. It's a little bit hard to show. So we're kind of going to slip our blaster accessory through this loop and then get the sort of the muzzle of the blaster into this loop here at the bottom. Really different, and I'm hoping this is going to be quite fun. I love these slender, detailed blasters that we get with modern figures. I'm sure this is going to look really cool because he doesn't have that standard style holster. This should look really cool. And we've got silver details here on the belt. Now the belt, I believe, is not, I'm going to have to sort of wiggle it around. It feels like it is attached to this thigh, but I can kind of pull it up a little bit. It is so tight though. I really like how sort of close to the body this is. Now I believe it is fixed because this strap here, this is sculpted. That is just fully painted and sculpted on the leg. So I'm curious to see how this will potentially affect the articulation of this point, because usually we can swivel the thighs at this point here and we can raise the leg. But if this is fixed at this point to sort of match up with the sculpted strap here, this might particularly affect our ability to move, especially his right leg. Now his left leg, we can see here, is really sort of unencumbered by any design. I'm just going to move his arm up out of the way. So we have this little sort of extra sort of sculpted cloth section here, a bit of a sash of sorts hanging on the hip. I'm sure that will not affect the way that we can move this left leg. And on the back of the belt, we've got another silver detail there, slinging across the back. Now we'll definitely test this all out with the articulation, but I believe I can move this. It feels, oh, okay, I can wiggle it, but pulling it up, I can see that there is really minimally a sort of a peg from the inside of the belt that is fitting into a slot in the back there of the white pants. So it is designed to not to move from that position there. Sometimes you can sort of wiggle belts around and really get them into position, but they're just tucked in there is a slot, sort of peg fitting into the back there. So that belt is not designed to move. And I kind of like the fact that it's kind of fitting. Sometimes I like to be able to tweak the belts around to get a little bit of posability with the legs. Sometimes if it's in a really specific position, I don't like it moving around, and Lando has a very definitive angle. It's kind of slung low on the right side. So I like the fact that we've got a few things there helping keeping the belt in that sort of downward angle there. It's kind of slung on his hip. It's a really cool look. And of course, he's got plain white pants with this kind of a flared bootleg kind of finish there, very 70s. I've got a tiny paint floor in here. There are some gray marks on the inside thigh. Not too big, not too much of a bother. Probably happened when they were painting this and just got a tad there on the inside. So we've got the leg printing is on this leg. Sometimes it's on the right leg. leg. This one, it's just in a little tiny silver font here on the inside of his left leg here. This is the right one. I'm mixing them up. And then, of course, we've got the brown soles for the white boots here. Again, very 70s style with that sort of block heel there. Really cool. So I really like the way that the sculpting has given us such a streamlined look to the pants, because of course we have to have a little bit of cut-ins and things like that to be able to really move the legs, but these look like straight pants. That is a really tight seam around the knees. I really like that. It doesn't catch the eye, even though we've got these articulation points. It really does give a streamlined pant look, because of course he doesn't wear armor or anything on his pants. They would just be, you know, straight white pants that flare out there at the ankle. I really, really like just how tight those seams are there at the front. Of course, turning around, we can see the articulation a little bit more. We've got that sort of cutout shape there to show the articulation there at the back. And even at the ankles, we don't really see much. We've got a little bit here peeking out at the back of the pants there. You can see it a little bit better there. But overall, that is just fantastic. Sometimes the cutouts come a little bit more down and sort of around the ankle bone there. This one's a little bit higher, sort of really matching up well to the hem of the pants there. I really, really like that. Of course, we've still got the cutouts at the thighs. It's really tricky to sort of get around that because we do want articulation. That's what the vintage collection is known for. But I'm really impressed with how tightly they got the sculpting on the pants. And we've even got the sort of seam lines. You can see that line running down at the side there. Just fantastic. Really, really cool. So I've already started playing with a little bit of the articulation, moving his arms out of the way to check out those belt details. So let's go through and check out how well we can pose him. Because he is a human figure firing a blaster, I'm not generally going to be doing too much acrobatically with this figure in terms of posing, but I'm probably going to want his arms firing his blaster, perhaps even replicating what he is doing on the backing card art. But still, I want to check out and see what this figure can do. So I don't think he's got too much in the way of sort of anything that's going to, some alien creatures with their head tails, it really affects how well we can move their head. He is pretty standard, of course. He's got a little bit of short hair, but nothing much in the way of the costume that's really going to get in the way. And the cord stays nice and cleanly on the neck. So you can see it is not really impacting, and there's actually a pretty good clearance just underneath the head there. I can turn the head from side to side without actually kind of dragging it against that cord, which is really nice. Now, picking up a little bit, I can see that red scarf goes right around the back there. Again, it's looped around the yellow of the shirt, so it's not actually touching the neck. We're not really it's not getting in the way anywhere there. So let's check out the arms. I already sort of lifted them up a little bit, but this is a shirt, and generally just sort of the clothing, the simpler sculpting sort of costume details there are not really going to get in the way. It's when we get to bulkier or perhaps droids or armor that we start getting sort of details, especially around the shoulders, that do affect how well. So my arm here is just a little bit tight. It's fighting me a little bit on that side, but I can get a pretty good angle over here. Sometimes they are just very tight straight out of the package, and they loosen up a little bit when you're starting to play with poses and stuff like that. So we can see the articulation here a little bit in the front. The monotone sort of yellow does a pretty good job of hiding it. Sometimes when you get different colors, it sort of really shows up there. So again, going to be a little bit stiff straight out of the box. There we go. Because I want to get him in a really good blaster position. So once we get the arm up, we do start to notice we don't have any printing there on the underside, but we can see that really cool cuff design there on the underside of his hand there, which we do see on the backing card. So I like that. And again, we can kind of get that similar kind of pose there on the other side. He does only have one blaster accessory. He doesn't have anything else to hold. He does have a kind of a classic grip here on his left hand. If you have spare accessories, perhaps you want to have him holding something. For me, he's probably going to have his hand down by his side, but I really like just how extended that trigger figure is. I'm really hoping that's going to help us get his blaster in there for a really good pose. Nice and easy. And of course, we can see that sort of side-to-side articulation there. He has got sort of cuffs on his, oh, that's very stiff. I'm not really getting much there. The cuffs on the sleeves are going to hit that a little bit. And on this hand, we've got more of an up and down. Again, the cuffs are kind of getting in the way and he's a little bit stiff. So I'm not getting a lot of movement. I can still rotate. The cape's getting in the way a little bit here. I can rotate the hands like usual. But I'm not really getting that much in terms of the sort of rocker action there with the articulation on the hands just because of the cuffs of the sleeves. But I know I would rather have the sleeves. I generally don't even really use the sort of side to side, up and down articulation. It's such a small attachment point. I have sort of a paranoia, whether it is warranted or not, about breaking the hands of my action figures. I really don't want to put too much stress, especially when the joints are sort of fighting me a little bit. Now, as usual, we've got this mid-torso articulation here through the center of the shirt. Some of the older figures tended to just have sort of like a swivel sort of point there across the waist, but we do get a lot more sort of movement here with these midline ones. I'm just trying to be careful of his scarf here, so we can bend him back to the point where I can start to see the inner workings there, and he comes all the way to the front, and he's got a nice side to side. Sometimes they're very clicky and very sort of fighting me. I can pivot him all the way around to the side to almost, you know, you start getting to a slightly unnatural level of twisting. I can twist them all the way around almost completely to the back. I'm not going to sort of really strain that, but that is really nice and fluid. Sometimes these figures really, you can sort of feel like, is that what I'm supposed to be doing, or am I going to break something? This one, I can move it around and it's really nice. I can move it quite a bit way in the back. So very nice torso articulation there. So I'm going to start off with the legs, with his left leg. That is stiff, and again, when they start to fight me, I don't like it. There we go. Okay, so can get to that level there pretty well. And then we've got that swivel there at the top. It's quite high on this one, so I can see that pretty easily. And I can straighten that up there. So yeah, and we can go out to the side. Again, I'm not sure that I'm going to be doing Lando in these wild poses, but it's pretty standard articulation because we just don't have anything else there. Oh, and while I'm looking at the down, sort of from a downward angle, I can see that ring that is painted on his hand. That's kind of fun. Little detail there on his left hand. Very nice. Didn't see that with the hand pointing down. That's kind of fun. But something I'm really curious about is the knees. I really like the sculpting on these pants. It's really nice and smooth. Of course, as usual, we're going to expose a little bit of that joinery there when we start to bend that back. Let's see how well I get the feeling. Oh no, I can actually get quite a point on the boots as well. I thought having it a little bit higher meant that tipping this back that we might get a little bit of sort of resistance from the back of the pants there, but I can still point the ankle there. And that even looks pretty cool from the front. It's not even that noticeable. Sometimes when you start moving the ankles around, you get these sort of cut-ins from the articulation, and it's just, oh, it looks a little bit awkward. Very nice. Okay, so the tricky question is, how much can I move his right leg here? So I'm just going to start with the easy stuff, the knees. Very nice. I like the feel of that. It's not fighting me. A little bit tighter here on this ankle. I get to there. It's a little bit tighter. This one's a little bit stiff on my particular figure. Just got to carefully click that one back. It's a little bit fighting on me there. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to be very careful so we can start to see it's kind of lifting a little bit further away from the body, because I feel like it's kind of fighting me, to be honest. I'm getting to about here and I can see that the holster is kind of lifting away from the leg a little bit, but because it's attached here, I'm not really sure that I want to fight that more than that. I know some people are a lot more braver with their figures than I am. I really, especially thinner little attachment points. Holsters tend to have thin straps. The plastic itself is just a little bit thinner. This part is kind of rubbery. It's not a brittle plastic, but still it's kind of, yeah. It is fighting me. I really don't, I'm not, yeah, it's pulling here. I don't think I can really lift the leg much on that side, which is what I expected. And as I mentioned, I'm probably not going to have Lando doing high kicks or anything like that. But yes, we do have a bit of restriction there. I can understand that there's always a trade-off with sort of accuracy to the source material. If he really does have a holster and this unique style, sometimes we have sort of the plastic, sort of more of a sort of a enclosed holster shape, and then we have a little tiny strap which can rotate around the thigh, so we do get a lot more movement. But this one is just so thin. They've obviously had to just attach it here and paint this strap on the leg, which, yes, because it is fixed at this point, we've now got this sort of point where everything is just sort of attached and fixing that leg, so it's not really going to move it. Some braver individuals might be able to get more movement out of that leg than I do, but I am just anxious about, sometimes it feels like Hasbro in not so many words is basically like, no, you're not going to move that leg. Just looking at the way that sculpting works, I'm not going to fight it, and I'm probably going to have my Lando sort of standing very securely. And now that I've kind of twisted his legs around, he's got a slightly wider legged stance. And I'm definitely going to play around with the posing and just getting him balanced and stuff like that. He's fairly balanced because he doesn't have heavy backpacks or heavy armor. He's just a standard human. I'm liking this cape though. That's such a fantastic piece of this particular figure. And I like that I can get a pretty good pose there with the arm. This is probably how I'm going to be having my particular figure, but I'm just going to lie him down very carefully because I want to go over the blaster accessory. I really like when Star Wars blasters are silver because they just render really well in the action figure scale here. There's just something about them that just looks, to me, just a little bit cooler than the plain black ones. I know DL44, E11s, they look iconic. They're mostly black, but these silver ones just look really cool. And I think it helps to really show off the detail because it catches the light so much better. So I can see all of the sculpting details on this one, and it is so tiny. You can see all the sort of the little circles, the little cutouts. We've even got a little bit of a black paint here at the top that goes all the way around. Really, really cool. Really nice. Slight bend on this part. When I lay it on the desk, I can just see that we've just got that slight curve, but of course it's pretty thin, especially around this point, and it just needs to be just sort of handled a little bit because it's been in that backing card packaging for a little bit, and sometimes they can get just a little bit out of shape from how they are inserted into those plastic trays. But I'm really hoping that this will be not too hard to put in Lando's hand because we've got an enclosed trigger guard here. He does have a very extended trigger finger, so I'm hoping that that will fit in there really nicely. So look at that texture on the grip. It's so small, I'm not even sure that it's showing up. We've got fantastic little texture there. Just incredible. I like how it catches the light, and I like it when Hasbro does a metallic silver paint rather than trying to cast it in a somewhat silver plastic. It always just comes across as a slightly pearlescent gray. It never looks as shiny as when they paint it with metallic silver. So I really like this blaster accessory. It looks really, really cool, especially when we compare it to how the blaster appears on that backing card art. So let's go and see how well he's going to put this in his hand. I'm hoping it's not going to be too much of a wrestle. Just generally takes a little bit of work just to get it past those fingers. So got those fingers in there, and his trigger finger is a little bit tight. It's not naturally just going straight in there. That's a very small trigger guard actually. I've got his figure lined up, but you can kind of see there, it's a little bit rectangular, and the finger on mine doesn't really want to go all the way through. It's kind of resting there. Yeah. I think I'm going to squish the finger a little bit to get it in more than that. It's kind of in there, but it's not going all the way through. And it might just take a little bit of, so wrestling and finessing the poses. You can see there, it's lined up really well. So from the outside perspective, that's a really nice grip. He looks like he's holding it correctly. Really, really nice. It's a little bit more of an upward sort of crook with the finger there. perhaps a little bit awkward. Sometimes they're just a little bit straighter, but I'm not really getting the finger to go all the way in. That's a very squared off, sort of more of a rectangular shape there. And the finger isn't fitting all the way through. That doesn't bother me. Sometimes they just hook in really, really cleanly and it's just nice and secure. It's very secure in his hand. That's not coming out. But yeah, I can kind of get a really cool pose, just like the back encounter is sort of holding it up. It is a much larger blaster pistol compared to some of the other ones. We've got this much longer sort of muzzle there to the blaster. Think about a lot of Han Solo's guns are kind of cut off at a sort of about more of this length here. So we've got this really cool length there. Very, very visual, sort of interesting with the sort of the vibrant silver with this outfit. Just looks really cool. And of course, I want to see this really interesting, slightly differently styled blaster pistol. So I can wiggle his finger around a little bit, so I think it's going to take a little bit of sort of finessing. Sometimes it just takes that little bit of extra work to get the blasters to kind of really go in the hands. So this is a little bit hard to show because it's always black on black, but this one hooks up and this one is closed. So this should be really easy to just get that emitter sort of part down in there. And then we've just got this hook that just kind of sits there. Just kind of sits around. Doesn't fully kind of seal back up. It's close, but it just kind of sits there. And I don't think, because we've got the scope on the top, maybe I can get the scope. I can kind of, I don't know if I really, oh, I can. Oh, okay, I can just get the scope to kind of, I don't know if I'm gonna, I don't think I'm gonna store it like this because that feels like that's bending that away from the main body of the blaster, but I can, because the scope is attached at these points, not further down, I can get to that sort of attachment point to fit under the scope, but it's flexing it out a little bit, which is not my favorite. So, but it does keep it at a better height to the belt. So I'm just gonna try pulling it out and putting that underneath. Yeah, so that kind of strap is kind of hitting where the trigger guard is. Perhaps that's not as sort of pretty because it's just kind of holding it there, but at least I'm not worried about sort of flexing that scope away from the body and potentially sort of bending it over time. So this is probably how I would put it. So we've still got sort of not too high up there onto the belt. Yeah, interesting attachment style. Of course, Hasbro has to try and replicate what is on the original costume and what is in the video game, of course. But that looks pretty cool. And I like that you can kind of really change where it is because it's just hooks. I can sort of push it up a little bit further so that that isn't hitting on the trigger guard there. It's kind of looks like it's kind of going in between. So I think that placement there, I think, is what I would do if I was putting the blaster accessory on the belt there. But I just really like the way it looks in Lando's hand. So that's probably what I'm going to be doing with my figure. But that's a really cool blaster accessory, and I like the way that it fits on his belt there. It looks a little bit more like an action figure sort of holster when the blaster's not in there, because we've got these sort of funny straps in this big black, but I just think the way that he holds it just looks really cool. So I'm just going to pop that in his hand one more time just to see if I can get that finger in perhaps a different position, because it's just a little bit bendy and I feel like I kind of have to sort of, yeah, this time it's not wanting to naturally go. I kind of have to suggest it, sort of push with my fingernail. It's definitely one that needs a little bit of encouragement to go into position there. Doesn't naturally want to go in there. Just a very small trigger guard. That's just that one critique I would have for that. But again, they're trying to be accurate to the source material, and I do really like the very small blasters that we have golly, when we think about some of those really big chunky blasters that made no sense. They were so oversized. They didn't look like a human being could carry them. I really like the ones that are in scale here. Fantastic details. For a fun comparison, I grabbed one of my older 5-point of articulation Lando figures that came out during the original release of Solo: A Star Wars Story for just a little bit of comparison. This one is pretty good for its era. Something about the straight pants really does work okay for the 5-point of articulation. And of course, we've got this plastic cape here, the striped scarf, a little bit easier to do than the shirt printing of this one. And I thought even the likeness was pretty good. Though I do see here we have that sort of metallic silver plastic rather than a paint. So if I compare the two here, you can really see the differences. I just like it when they do that silver paint rather than casting in the silver plastic. And we can see, if I put them side by side, just that little bit of extra detail that we get from the new modern printing. I can see the white paint and just the plain black pupil paint of this one. The hair paint was pretty good, but there's just something about the way that modern vintage collection figures have that with that digital printing for the eyes so much better. They just really look properly scaled there. We can see that same sort of folded over shirt that he also wears in for his other outfits from the film and stuff like that. But I really think these are fun together, but we can really see the sort of upgrades that we've had from the vintage collection and the detail that we can get from modern printing, modern levels of articulation, and just that fabric cape is really fun. It's not going to fit over the shoulders in quite the same way as this black one does, but I like the way that it sort of flares out and we can really see that accent color on the inside. This cape is black on the inside. There isn't much to show, and he has that vibrant yellow shirt there. This one can be removed. It just sort of comes off as a plastic cape, and then we have what looks like a really simple action figure. This kind of reminds me of a yellow version of the outfit Han wears when he gets out of Carbonite, with just sort of his plain pants and just a shirt and not much else. So I think this one definitely looks better when we put that cape on over the top, but again, I think this one is the superior figure. I think it's fun that we've now got, you know, different outfits of Lando from the film. He has some really cool outfits. Of course, he has such an incredible fashion style, but this is such a cool figure. So excited to finally get it out of the packaging. I loved the way it looked next to that character art on the backing card. You can kind of see why I kept him on his backing card for so long. He's a slightly older figure, but I'm definitely happy to finally have him out of the packaging so I can add him to my solo display. We didn't really get too many versions of Lando from that original release, so I finally have a different version to put in my display, and I think they look fantastic. Of course, you know, I feel a little bit sad about some of the figures we got in that 5-point of articulation era. I recently opened up a new vintage collection version of Cassian Andor from Rogue One and compared him to a 5-point of articulation one from that original Rogue One wave, which was also 5-point of articulation. It was really interesting to see the upgrades and the differences and things like that, and I feel a little bit sad about some of the older figures, but they are still nostalgic for me, so they're still going to be on my display, but they might just be a little bit more towards the back, and these ones are going to go in the front because their detail and just the printing is just, it's fantastic. I absolutely love the vintage collection. I'm trying to buy absolutely as many of the figures as we can, and I hope Hasbro never stops making the vintage collection line. I want to be buying these figures well into my retirement age and possibly even beyond as my next generation of family members continue Star Wars collecting. Absolutely fantastic. This is so fun. I love the vibrant colors, the details, the accessories, all looks great. I'm going to pop this one down. He doesn't stand up very well. That's another thing about the articulation. You can tweak the posing to just get them much more balanced there. That was so much fun. He's a fun character. Really happy to add this one to my Solo: A Star Wars Story display. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars vintage collection figure and had a lot of fun. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again really soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a vintage collection fan, I recently opened up the Director Orson Krennic figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection opening playlist. This is the way.